Spectrovision Radio. Spectrovision Radio.
Hello and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast, where we listen to people's fairy encounters. But take heed, we're not talking about winged Tinkerbells here. These are real fairies, real encounters that took people like you and I by surprise. Stay a while and hear their stories. My name is Jo Hickey Hall, and I'm a folklore researcher. Hello everybody and welcome to the Modern Fairy Sightings podcast. I'm here this time with Rebekah, who is in Upper Michigan in the vicinity of Lake Superior. Welcome, Rebekah.
Thank you.
It's really nice to get together with you because we've been chatting for a while, and you have had quite a bit of activity up there where you are, particularly in your home.
Well, my experience with the other world, for the most part, started when I moved into my current house. I come from a very Christian family. They are wonderful people. They are very sincere in their faith. I did reach a point where, due to personal reasons, I began to disagree with certain portions of what they believed. And a number of years ago, I experienced a situation at a job that I had that it was an abusive workplace, I think, and I was there for many years. And I lost my job and I became very angry and I felt very betrayed over it. And it caused me to question a lot of things. And I guess that is what I really need to lead up with, because that, I think, is what brought me to my first experience that I had here in this house. And I'd lived here for many years. And I do need to correct myself, because there was a prior experience that was a ghost experience that we had when we first moved in, and we can discuss that later. But the reason that I finally reached out to you was I was at my home, and this was a few years after I had had the difficult experience with my workplace, but I was very much in the midst of, I guess you could say, emotional and intellectual turmoil. It lasted for many years. Thankfully, it's healed now. When I was questioning a great many things. And I am a nurse. I, at the time, was working a lot of midnight shifts. And so I was at home one day, and I believe my daughter was in college at the time. So she would have been not around. My son was in school at the time. I was the only one in the house when this occurred. And I was in my dining room. And it was, the things I remember about it, it was an uncommonly quiet day. Very, very quiet. I don't know why, it just was. And I was just kind of going about my business in my dining room. And there is a room off of our dining room where we keep our electronics. I am actually sitting in it right now. And the door was open. It's actually the door that's right behind me right now. It was open at the time. In fact, I didn't even think we had a door on it. It was just a doorway at the time. My husband built the door later. And I saw a small man, probably knee-high, maybe a little higher than that. He was completely brown, and he trudged past the doorway. And in the moment, I was almost so surprised that I wasn't surprised. It's like I didn't react to it at all. I almost had to process what happened in the days that came later on. I don't think he saw me. I had the impression that he was very, very tired and that he was on a long journey. I mean, he truly, when I say he trudged, he trudged. That was the characteristic that he had. He was brown all over, head to toe brown. He appeared to be dressed in trousers or leggings of some kind, and he was either wearing a fur top or was partially transformed into an animal. And And that's it. That's what happened. It was a life-changing experience because I never dreamed such a thing could actually happen. So that's it.
Yeah. Oh, did you sense there was somebody there at the door behind you just then? So
Oh, I believe that's a family member.
yes, very timely.
Yes.
Yeah. It really is quite something, isn't it? You're going about your business, and as you say, the fact that it's noticeably quiet is interesting, and then this happens, and it happens so matter of fact. So, do you feel that this being saw you?
I don't think it saw me, no.
Mhm.
If it saw me, it certainly gave no sign of seeing me. It did not look at me. I was probably at maybe like a 45-degree angle to it, but facing it. And it just walked past the doorway.
Mm.
So yes, I had no sense that it actually saw me.
Yeah, and doorways are, thresholds. These are threshold points that,
Hmm.
and it kind of reminds me a little of the episode Tea Time Interrupted. I don't know if you remember that episode from the very
Hmm.
first series where, this being is kind of seen, in the doorway by two sisters as they sit in their kitchen. So, how did you make sense of this afterwards?
It took me a long time to make sense of it. I thought it through. I began slowly to change my worldview. I think I have always had a bit of an animistic worldview despite my upbringing. Again, like I say, I was in a certain amount of emotional and intellectual turmoil as to how I viewed the world at the time. And this was definitely an impetus to start exploring other ways to see things. Things that I maybe thought, because I came from a certain amount of indoctrination, that I maybe thought weren't the right way to view things. It gave me the freedom to, I guess, try other things, see what worked for me personally. And
Mm.
and that was the start. And then the thing that was interesting to me after this too is I began tentatively after a few years to kind of mention it to my family that such a thing had happened. And my daughter, in particular, I discovered had had experiences of her own in the house and had been having them right along for quite some time. I was unaware of that. So I found that very interesting.
That's
So,
right. I remember you mentioning this to me in an email that it's surrounded around the front door. Is that correct?
yes, it's the main door that we use to our house. It goes directly into our kitchen. And it would be approximately to the left of me once you go through like the little closet area that
Mhm.
is to my left. It was interesting to me too when this happened because when I saw this, the route that this being took made no sense in our house. It's not a way that would be natural to walk through our house because you literally would be walking through a closet with a toilet, through this room, and then out through a set of bookcases, which are on my right, and then out through the exterior wall. It made no sense within the pattern of the house. So I can only conclude that whatever I saw was we were superimposed on it, or vice versa, existing in the same space.
Mm.
I know it was an interesting thought that I don't think had ever occurred to me before. I mean, you read science fiction and fantasy and different things, but it was the first time that I had experienced such a thing. So,
We spoke at the time a little bit about the idea of a kind of fairy path
hmm.
and what was in your area. So if it didn't make sense in terms of the layout of the house,
Hmm.
how did it make sense in terms of your location?
Well, after we spoke, I did a bit of digging, a little bit of exploration. He had asked me to look into seeing if there are any mounds in my area or anything like that. And to be perfectly honest, while southern Wisconsin has a lot of them, many of them I think were ultimately destroyed by the settlers that came into the area. But even with that, there are still a lot of them. Northern Wisconsin, which is very close to where I live, I'm right on the border between the two states, just so you know, within like 5 miles of the border. I actually work in one state and live in the other state. Um, but when I looked, there were basically two in my area. One um, is down by Lake Michigan, and it's about a 3-hour drive from our house. And the other is not really anything ancient. It's just maybe 250 years old. But we have a beach up on Lake Superior that actually has a story associated with it. And it has a couple of burials there. I think it's just a couple of people that are dated back to the 1700s. But there is a story of an abduction um, of a young woman by the little people that are up there.
Mm.
And it's interesting. It's at a place where I've been many, many times. I've never really seen anything like that there, but it's a story that was actually it was recorded by a gentleman. He was actually would have been one of the settlers in the area back in the 1700s, I believe myself. He was married to an indigenous woman, and I believe he learned the story from her. In any case, I mean, the story is actually posted at the park. Um, so so I got curious about this, and I thought, well, I took a ruler, and I took a map, an old-fashioned paper map, and I put a pin in each of these locations, and I drew a line from one to the other, and discovered that it basically goes right through my backyard. So that was interesting to find out, and kind of explained a few things to me. Um, it's a it's an interesting area where I live. I also have a mine more or less in my backyard. It's about a 7-minute walk from my house. I don't know if there's any association with that as well. I know that things can come up from the underground. And so I've always thought that that might be something that could be associated with the things that we've experienced here as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I feel the mine is of potential interest in terms of, what you've been experiencing, but also
Hmm.
that kind of yeah, the line that appears to potentially run from one, location to another is also something that we should, be open-minded about. And
Hmm.
can you remember the story that went along with the second location that you mentioned?
Okay. Well, the second location, the story that goes along with it is a young indigenous woman was on the eve of her wedding day, and whatever their equivalent to that was. And she had asked her family if she could go visit this other location where she liked to just spend time there. Apparently, it was a place that they were always warned about because the little people were there and there was danger associated with it. But she'd been there many times, and so she went, and she never returned.
Mm.
There is a story that they did see her at one time later walking along the beach with a gentleman who I believe was. I said he had something green about him. I know that. I would have to actually look up the story for you, but it is a fascinating story. I know that in the story they did a search for her, a torchlight search, and they never found any sign of her after that.
Mm. That is
So
sad.
it was
That's
an interesting story.
Yeah, it's interesting and a kind of sad, very sad disappearance as well of somebody that was presumably, documented. But yeah, it is, these kinds of areas and these kinds of stories are of interest to us when we're looking at these kinds of experiences to try and make sense of what is going on. What is it that we're kind of missing when we have something occurring in our home? And when I speak to people, and it's the same with me as well, when I see things in the home, they don't take the usual route that we would take through the house. They kind of
Hmm.
do seem to kind of take these diagonal routes through our homes. They're not always at the same level as us either. Sometimes they
Hmm.
are of a higher level, as in appear to
Hmm.
potentially have their ground level at a higher point, and equally sometimes they are lower.
Hmm.
So, yeah, it is absolutely fascinating. So, what about with your daughter then? What had she been experiencing?
So what she told me that she had been experiencing. So the door in question actually has a window in it. And what she had been experiencing is she would come down the stairs at night sometimes and she would see faces in the window. She initially described them to me as severed heads, which must have been terrifying. Later on, she said sometimes they were clown faces. And she told me that it got to the point that she was afraid to even walk past that window, especially at night. And so, when we got to talking about this later, I said that, I thought we might have something in our house. This was before not we hadn't yet explored the idea that there was a path running through the house at this point. And she was like, something like a boggart. It's not a friendly, happy thing. Of course, as I know that you are aware, we kind of surmised later when she was about 12, she had found a catch of crystals, beautiful quartz crystals. Some of them were like that long. They were huge. And because she wanted money, she sold them to her friends. So, and all of this started after that. So I'm not sure if she maybe took something that she wasn't intended to take. She told me recently that it only really ended when she left and she went off to college. Of course, I myself had never seen any of this, but she is adamant that this occurred. So,
And what age
yeah.
would she have been at the time?
So she was 12
So
when she
that's a
took the
very kind of,
crystals.
yeah, that's so that's quite a transitional time for a young person
Yes.
too. I wonder, so with the crystals, were they naturally in the earth, or do you think somebody placed them there?
I suspect they were from the earth. I think they were in some of the mine tailings.
Oh,
Um, yes.
how
Be
interesting. Yeah.
because there are mine tailings in many, many places around here, and that's what she described.
Mm.
So, yes.
And it's not possible to get them back now, I suppose.
Not the majority of them. We do have a few of the smaller ones that I found not too long ago. And so she and I have decided that when the snow is gone, because we have a lot of snow right now, that we will try to walk down to see if we can find the location. She didn't initially remember what we got talking about, and she thinks she has an idea of the approximate location where they were at, see what we can return. She was thinking she would try to find something equivalent that she can give in exchange for the things that she took. So,
I think that's a fantastic idea. I really
yeah,
do. And, you know, when we're working with intent and her intent and your intent is to, to put it right, um, I feel certain that she would be led to the right place in order to place these crystals back into the ground. Were they clear quartz then?
they were clear quartz, yes.
Mhm.
And there were a lot of them. Um, must have had, there were at least 10 of them. I know that. I think there were more. So, yeah,
Goodness me. I mean, I do remember you mentioning that to me, and what a find for a young person.
sure.
Yeah. And, clear quartz has some qualities that are, they make places inducive to these
Hmm.
kinds of experiences too. Actually, the picture behind me is Valdue Dolmen in Jersey, and
Hmm.
there is a lot of quartz in the granite because in Jersey is a granite
Hmm.
island. Um, as we know, it's a conductor of energy, and people many thousands of years ago also knew of their qualities too. So
Hmm.
that in itself is interesting. That the area that you're
Hmm.
on contains presumably a lot of this clear quartz.
Hmm.
So how have you been able to, or have you rectified anything within your home, or have you ever tried kind of speaking out to whatever you're experiencing in your home, or has the activity kind of slowed down and gone now?
It comes and goes.
Mhm.
I would say that I probably have experienced things since that time, maybe once a year or every 2 years. I don't think that we're commonly passed through, but there have been incidents since then that we have had for sure. I have an area where I have some plants. It's kind of in, I guess you could say, the hot spot of our house. Um, and I leave things there for them in case anybody comes upon them. To my left, if you go through the closet with the little bathroom and you go out that direction, would be the door that we come and go through. And there's a little alcove area there underneath the one window that really is a good window to grow plants in. And my husband had built a tall table there, and I leave things there. And honestly, last night I made sure that I left something, and I explained to whatever might or might not be there what I was doing today, so that they understood.
What kind of response did you sense as a result of that?
I just sensed peace over the whole thing. I didn't sense any problem.
Great, that's good
So
to know.
yes,
Good to know.
I felt they should be informed.
Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. No, I like that. I like that you have an empty seat next to you as well,
Yes.
because, that's a kind of symbolic, mark of honor for whoever might be sitting there now, kind of,
Hmm.
joining in or listening in some way.
Sure.
Yeah. So,
So yeah.
with the being itself,
Hmm.
what do you think he was? Can you describe him a little more? Because you said that he was kind of fairy above the waist.
Hmm.
He was about a foot high. What
Hmm.
else about him can you remember?
Well, the main things that I remember, as I said, he was about a foot high. He was small. He was walking. I remember he had like a staff, a stick that he was walking with.
Mm.
He had an expression of being extremely weary. Um, Again, he had the fur covering him. Those are the main things that I remember from him. The overwhelming sense that I got is that he was just extremely tired. He'd been on a long, long journey, and my house just happened to be on the journey. He was not interested in me that I could see. I suspect he was, obviously a creature that was, shall we say, indigenous to the area as opposed to something that could have come with some of the settlers that came over. I do not think that he was something that would have been European in origin. I don't think that's who he was. So,
What kind of type, shape face did he have? I know it's hard to, you know, to grasp that if it's been a while ago, but just the impression that you had of him.
well, he honestly looked similar in face to the indigenous people in the area. I mean, to be quite honest, that's how he looked.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Or how absolutely
Hmm.
beautiful to witness this.
Hmm. Yeah. And since then we've had a few minor experiences around the house since. I've never had anything as clearly seen as that. I mean, we had the bird pass through the wall in our kitchen. That was clearly seen. That was a bird. Was very interesting. So, and my son and I witnessed that. And then I had the one other time where I saw what appeared to be like a silhouette of someone that appeared very similar to the little man that I saw. But that was just in silhouette. That was just black, and it passed right past where I was sitting. And it was actually in my living room. So yeah. And those are the sorts of things that happen from time to time. Small items will go missing. They'll be turn up in strange places, if at all. Things like that happen. Occasionally, something feels like it plays a trick on us. So I do think things turn up from time to time, even if I'm not necessarily always sensing them. So yeah, it's been an interesting place to live.
I mean, to me, it sounds like you're living in peace with them.
Yeah, I prefer to live and let live. Um, I don't interact with them a great deal in that I try to interact with them. I do not try to get them to do anything for me. But I just don't see why we can't both be in the same space.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Can you describe what happened with the bird with your
Okay.
son?
So in my kitchen, I was with my son and we were just talking to each other. And suddenly a small brown bird emerged from a wall, middle of a wall, and it flew right past us and then disappeared just before it got to the window. And this happened in the middle of January, about the time of year we're in right now. I know he saw it because I saw the expression on his face. He said that all he saw was something dark go past me, heard the swish. I saw it very clearly as a small brown bird. I didn't see it necessarily as anything other than a bird, although it certainly could have been. My daughter actually thinks it was probably a fairy transformed into a bird herself when she and I discussed it. But I was actually kind of relieved to see it because sometimes you begin to question the things that you have seen in the past, especially if you were by yourself. And I know for a fact that my son witnessed this as well. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, it was interesting and unexpected. And the interesting thing too is, we had our Christmas tree up in the previous couple of weeks, and there were a couple of times I had heard what sounded like a bird kind of flapping around the tree and everything. So I don't know what the origin of the bird was, but I think it may have been in our house for a little while. Had it been a living bird, my 3 cats and 3 dogs certainly would have gone after it. I wouldn't have been aware of it. So, and that never happened. So that was just an interesting thing that occurred.
It really is. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I wonder if it is just part of this world that these what seem to feel, I want to say pilgrims of some kind.
Hmm.
Pilgrimage maybe isn't the right word, but they are following a path
Hmm.
of purpose, it seems, particularly if you're getting the impression that this being is quite sort of weary, and he's travelled a long way. I know you did mention that that site of special interest is rather a long way away. 7 miles, did you say? Or 7 hours?
Yeah, well, so the one that's close to us is probably about 15 miles away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other one that you mentioned that was quite
Oh,
some.
the other one, it takes about a 3 hour drive to get
Yeah.
there. So,
Okay.
so that would probably be over 100 miles away.
Mm.
So,
And what is that again? The other place that you mentioned?
it's a series of burial mounds that run along a river close to Lake Michigan.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Which, if you look at them, Lake Michigan is the one that goes north and south. Superior goes east and west, and then the other two that are go into like Pennsylvania and New York, they also go east and west. So yeah,
Do you know anything about that location?
I don't know a great deal about it. I know that Lake Michigan is interesting because it has an area that is kind of considered almost like a submerged Stonehenge. Um, that I would have to do more research on the subject. I don't know that they necessarily know what that area was put there for, but presumably it was back before the lakes themselves were even there. And I know the lakes, for all their great size, are in the scheme of what's happened in the world are relatively recent occurrences, like, you know, less than millions of years old is my understanding. I think that they came about with more recent ice ages. You would want to consult a geologist to make sure that I'm giving you correct information, but that is the impression that I've had. And so I believe that people that lived there at the time created this in the bottom of Lake Michigan. I know there are many islands in all of the lakes that can be quite interesting places to go, from what I understand. I really have only visited a couple just very, very briefly. I haven't spent time on them to any great degree other than one where I camped for a while. So, and that was long before I had any of these experiences. So I didn't go looking for anything more, shall we say. The lake is an amazing area. So,
Yeah. I mean, it really speaks to me. In Jersey, where I'm from,
mhm,
not too far from this dolmen behind me,
mhm,
there's a beach that we used to go down onto, and we used to actually hold rituals there.
mhm,
There are some stone formations on that beach that
mhm,
look like a fallen down dolmen. They're very different to the naturally
mhm,
forming rocks on the beach. And there's an idea that because Jersey is so close to France, that
mhm,
before, um, when the seas were a lot lower and kind of taking up a different shape, on the
mhm,
planet, that people used to walk from
mhm.
French mainland over to Jersey, and that there are
Sure.
potentially these structures now on the seabed, similar to where
Hmm.
what you're describing there, that presumably would have been a valley
Hmm.
with islands. I mean, not
Yes.
islands as such, but raised areas coming out of the valley in the same way
Sure.
that Jersey is, and Jersey is covered in dolmens,
Hmm.
and that are still very accessible, like this one.
Hmm.
And I'm feeling, a similar sort of story here with people moving through these structures on pilgrimage or on pathways that were sacred in some way to them.
Hmm.
And it would be interesting to kind of look closer at that and see if there is anything remaining in the local folklore, the indigenous
Hmm.
folklore for that area.
And I have done what I can to look into the folklore of the area. It's hard because so much has been lost. And I do think that, those that are the keepers of that folklore are not necessarily always wanting to share it with others for reasons that are totally understandable. So, the searches that I have done have primarily been online searches. I attempt to find good sources. Some are, of course, better than others. But yeah, it's just a very interesting thing. I mean, and I feel like the presence of so much water in the area. For all we are technically we are in the middle of the mainland of the continent, and yet here we have these huge, amazing lakes everywhere, and they've had so much on them. I mean, Lake Superior just itself has had over 500 shipwrecks on it, and it's just a fascinating place, to live. So
So much there
yeah.
beneath the surface, if you will,
Hmm.
I wonder if at some point there might be a coming together and a sharing of stories between communities, because you might kind of get those missing pieces of the puzzle.
Sure. Yeah, I would love to find out more. Like I say, unfortunately, I work a great deal, and so I don't always have time to look into things like I would like to. But yeah, it's been fascinating. I know the local area, just from a physical standpoint, everything I can get to that's close, I've explored about as thoroughly in person as I can. Just I'm a wanderer. I walk places, and I like to see what's there. So yeah, it is very interesting. It's been fascinating living here for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a route that I ever thought my life would take because again, I did not have a great deal of experience like this when I was younger. So,
So the wanderer found you as a fellow
yep, it
wanderer.
found me. Yes.
Did your situation with work and what you were describing, did that kind of fix itself after the experience of seeing?
Well, many things happened because I work in nursing homes. Um, and I was in a management position, and COVID eventually came, so things actually got very difficult for a while.
Mm.
The situation that I had come out of, the abusive situation, I no longer worked there. I worked at another place. And of course, COVID was the great disruptor of everything. We did our best. It was very much like being in a fortress that is under siege. But we got through it, and that was a difficult time for everybody.
Yeah, it really was. Well, thank you for,
Yeah.
for what you do.
And so that's pretty much it. I mean, like I say, we had our initial ghost experience in our house. It was the beginning of everything, and it involved the door, believe it or not. So when we first moved in here, my children were very small. We moved in 2000, um, and it just was. It's an older home. It's about 90 years old right now, and it was just a place that I felt was a very happy place. You know how you can feel when terrible things have happened someplace? Well, sometimes you can have the opposite sense as well. And we moved in here on July 1st. My kids were 4 and 2 at the time. And and life went on. At the time I was working midnight shift at a place. My husband was working like an evening shift. So he would get home around midnight. I would go to work at 9 o'clock in the evening. So there was about a 3-hour overlap, and my mother in law would come and babysit the kids at that point. And there were also times when I would be by myself. The kids would be asleep. Mark would be working. And, you would get the sense that you weren't alone. Of course, now I know there may have been more reasons for that than just this one situation. But in any case, my daughter at the time would occasionally talk about an angel that would come see her. She's the older of my two children. And it was just an odd situation. I really didn't know what to make of it. I didn't make too much of it. I wasn't afraid of it. That was good. So we'd lived in the house about 3 months, and I looked outside my house, and there was a woman that was taking pictures of our house. And of course, I wanted to find out what that was all about. So I went down and I spoke to her, and it turned out she was a granddaughter of the people that had originally built the house, which was quite an interesting thing. So she told me a little bit about the history of their house. And they had built it when they were engaged to be married. And immediately after their honeymoon, they moved into the house. So it was their newlywed house, and they lived a long, happy life. They raised 3 children in the house. Eventually, they passed away, and the house went to their daughter. Their 2 sons were married and had moved off other places. The daughter was a professional woman who worked in one of the cities that are a couple 100 miles away. And eventually, she returned home and she retired in it. And then eventually she sold it to the couple that sold it to us 10 years after they purchased it. So the interesting thing is I brought her in, and I brought her through the house, and she saw the children, and she made a comment. My grandmother would be so happy to know that there are children here again. So couple of days go by after this. In the evening, I would sit on my bed with my children, and I would read them bedtime stories, waiting for my mother-in-law to come. And this was to get them settled and ready for bed. And she was due in about an hour and a half. And suddenly, we heard the kitchen door open. We heard the knob turn. We heard the door open. We heard the door shut. And my daughter sat up and she said, Grandma, are you there? Thinking that it was my mother-in-law coming. And it was an hour too soon. I went out and I looked everywhere. There was nobody there. And to be perfectly honest, in our home, people don't come up where we live very often because we're not real close in town or anything. And there was just nobody there. And after that, the sense of this presence in our house went away. And I didn't have, again, any experiences for many years. And the more we thought about it, the more we realized, I think it was the woman who originally owned the house, the woman's grandmother. And seeing her granddaughter made her realize it was time. It was time to move on, give the house to a new family. And so I always felt very honored that we were given the house, from the people that came beforehand. And we haven't had another ghost since then. It was just right in the beginning. And so after that, the Fae came, and that was a different story and interesting. But yeah, that was a wonderful thing.
That's lovely. It's really
Yeah,
lovely. And
yeah. I like having a ghost story out there that's not a scary story,
yeah,
because so often people frame them as just this terrible thing, and that's not always the case. Sometimes things are just, it takes people time to be ready to move to the next step.
it's very true. And we can live in peace and happiness with these people that once lived in our homes. I know that we do where we're living, and
Hmm.
I think it's more common than we think, really. But that's really
Yeah,
lovely. So that, as you say, that door playing the part of a portal again.
yeah, it does. It really seems to. It's interesting. The door itself has always been interesting because it's never latched particularly well, except that sometimes it will lock itself and lock us out of the house. It doesn't happen often, but it's happened enough times to be. Um, then we realize we have to go around and we get in through a different door. We don't normally keep the door locked where we live. It's just nobody comes up where we're at, other than a couple of neighbors that are in the area. But even the few houses that are up here, most of them just sit empty all the time anyway. So yeah, they're ones that were previously owned, or somebody owns them in the cities and might come up once a year. So yeah, that's a pretty empty neighborhood most of the time.
Which I guess means that the landscape itself has just been left alone, pretty
For
much.
the most part, yes.
I feel
For the
that's
most part, it is, yes.
yeah.
It's grown a great deal since I've been here. Back in the 1930s and 40s, I believe that a lot of the trees were cut down. we have woods, but they're not particularly ancient woods. And I think that happened, during World War II. It was part of the war effort and everything. But since then, a lot of it has come back. And I was noticing, as long as I've lived up here, how much the trees have grown since we've been up here. So, yeah.
Oh, it sounds good. What a lovely place to be living. It does sound idyllic where you are.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that you and your daughter are going to kind of reach out and do something together, which is really nice to be able to do that together. Something that's meaningful to the landscape and potentially
Hmm.
this being that showed themselves that
Hmm.
day. And yeah, I'd love to hear kind of if anything happens as a result of that.
Yeah. Once we have an opportunity to do it, I'll let you know if anything comes of that. I think the hope is that there's peace after them. I personally have not felt a lack of peace. She has, but again, I was not really involved in the original transgression either.
Mm.
So yeah,
And
yeah.
thanks for sharing your story. Yeah, keep us posted, and yeah, let's see what happens.
Well, thank you so much. It's been nice talking to you.
Lovely.
You have a lovely day, and good luck with your book.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks so much for listening and watching. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider joining us on Patreon for dozens more episodes of unreleased bonus content, monthly online events, and a private chat. We are a warm, supportive community, and it really helps to support the project. Find us on patreon.com/The Modern Fairy Sightings Podcast.